So this is our last week of Daniel. Some of you are like, I thought last week was. Well, it is not. Yep. Because Daniel is, as we have noticed, it's quite a big, it seems to go from like one side to the next. You started off with all these cool Sunday school stories, and then by the end, you start having these really weird dreams and visions. And then you start getting into the death and destruction and the chaos the Antichrist is going to bring. The book is all over the place. And so how do we summarize a book like this? How do we, in our mind, when we think of Daniel, what's something that comes to mind? Have you guys ever had to make your children do something? I'm not talking about grounding them, okay? I mean, yeah. We get that part. I'm talking physically make them obey. So for example, I need you to pick up this toy. And that happens to be the time in the middle of Walmart where they decide it's time to go nuclear explosion right here. And they do their flopping maneuvers or whatever. Thankfully, we haven't had any of those real bad incidents with our girls. Not saying they can ever happen though, because at home, oh yeah, we get them. So, Vera or Thea and Petra's now learning how to do it, have the whole drop down. And you're just like, well, what do? I told them they needed to pick up this toy. They are choosing to disobey. So after a while, you're like, okay, they're just not going to do it. So then you walk over, you pick them up, and you sort of hold their arms. And you make them pick up that toy. They scream louder because they know what you are doing. And you make them hug that toy. And you're dragging them over and drop it in the toy box. And then you feel good as a parent because you just really made your kid mad. Oh, it's just fun. What you have just exercised over your child is your sovereignty over them. Yes, child, you have a free will. Yes, you decided to make a very bad and poor choice. Yes, you will still obey. And there is that period of time that lasts for about a year or two where you can confidently do that. And then over time, your children will get bigger and stronger, and the odds of a mom manhandling a 15-year-old boy and making him obey becomes a little more difficult. Am I right? You really just can't drag that boy around anymore. But your dad can when he comes home. Yeah, that's usually the line, okay? That's what I got a lot of times. And let me tell you, my dad couldn't manhandle me when he decided to. But my parents exercised sovereignty over me. It's not perfect and complete and full sovereignty, because if we really break it down, at some point we are only human, and our kids do get bigger and they become adults, and we no longer can exercise sovereignty over them. One of the most controversial topics of the Bible surround the issue of God's sovereignty. Is God actively in control of the entire universe, its systems and functions? We say it. But it's that question when we really start playing that out into areas of the Bible, it makes some things a little harder to understand. It makes things a little harder to comprehend, or maybe at times we don't like it. We don't really like where that goes. So God's in complete control over everything? Yes. And then, us and our grand wisdom, we try to find all the areas that he's not. Yeah, us foolish humans. Okay. So the definition we're going to function with today is the sovereignty of God is the biblical teaching that all things under God's rule and control, and that nothing happens without his direction or permission. God works not just some things, but all things according to the counsel of his own will. Ephesians 1:11. His purposes are all-inclusive and never thwarted. Isaiah 46:11. Nothing takes him by surprise. The sovereignty of God is not merely that God has the power and right to govern all things, but that he does so, always and without exception. In other words, God is not merely sovereign de jure, that is in principle, but sovereign de facto, that is in practice. Because all of us can say God is in complete, God is God, of course. But God is actively and constantly and will forever be exercising his sovereign control over the universe, its systems, its functions. The ramifications of God's sovereignty touch on issues of salvation, prophecy, God's promises, and more. Months ago, we began our study in Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. Verse 1 says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. See, Daniel 1:1 starts off firmly. Man is doing what mankind does, and that is attacking one another. We find out in verse 2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. What? God gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. How what? So God was sovereignly in control, while at the same time, mankind does what mankind does. That's just really fascinating. See, God gave the nation of Israel over. God sovereignly acted in a way that controlled the destiny of nations. And Daniel, the book of Daniel, summarizes and screams that principle in every single chapter. God is and will always be and always was completely and perfectly in control. We see it in every story in Daniel, every account, every prophecy, every dream, everything. God was, is, and will always be in sovereign control. No matter what people think, how people act, or whatever spiritual opposition that rises, God will accomplish his plan here on earth. And so we're going to review we're going to review some of those aspects of God's sovereignty in Daniel. The first one. Oh yeah, there's the verse if you guys didn't know it. All right. He controls the destiny of nations, or the destiny of kingdoms. Point 1. So Daniel chapter 2. Now because it is a summary, we are going to go back and forth. I will tell you the verse number. You can turn there. We're going to be bouncing around, okay? So Daniel chapter 2, it says we were given the account of a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. If you guys remember, this giant, weird-looking statue. You guys remember that? With this cool explosion at the end, where God slung a huge rock, broke the awesome statue. See, it starts off in Daniel chapter 2, 10, 11. It says, the Chaldeans answered the king and says, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. And if you guys remember, Nebuchadnezzar had this crazy dream. And he goes up to his wise men and all of his counselors. He's like, I had a dream. I want you to tell me what it was and what it means. And they're like, nobody can do that. Nobody can do that. Half the time, I don't even remember my own dreams. Have you wondered that? You remember one little thing? You can't even remember your own dreams. And here Nebuchadnezzar, he wants them to tell him his dream and to tell him what it means. Verse 11, the thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. They recognize, the Chaldeans and all these counselors and magicians and enchanters, they realize this is impossible. It has to be somebody outside of normal humanity who can somehow see and read minds, who has a perfect memory, can tell us what this means. It's not going to happen. It's impossible. See, Daniel chapter 2, verse 27 through 28, Daniel actually gets the dream from God. It says, Daniel answered the king and said, in verse 27, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show it to the king, the mystery that the king has asked. Daniel is even telling you, I can't even tell you. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dreams and the visions of your head as you lay in your bed are these. And then, boom, crazy statue. Head, gold, body, arms, silver, bronze, iron, clay and iron, awesome rock. Awesome rock does this. That's your dream. Huh, okay. What does it mean? What? We actually found out that King Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. And then you had this, was the Persian government that was coming and taking over. And we saw that play out actually in the book of Daniel. And then the book of Daniel constantly kept mentioning a kingdom of iron or kingdom of bronze that was coming. This kingdom of bronze was going to be broken up into 4 pieces, etc. And then the legs of iron, they really didn't exactly know who this was, but somebody was coming. And the Greeks sure realized that they were scared of the coming Roman government, the Roman authority that came and set up. And then you have this kingdom right here, this mix of iron and clay. And I propose to you, hey, actually we are in a time of iron and clay. Just get you thinking. So right there, God is telling them, telling Gentiles, I have sovereign control over the destiny of kingdoms. There was no way Nebuchadnezzar, no matter how strong he got, was going to be able to change the fact that eventually the Persian government was going to overrun him. No matter how hard he tried, it was going to happen. No matter how hard the Persians or how big they get, they were not going to be able to stop the coming horde of Alexander the Great. And who in their right mind would have predicted Alexander the Great would have just randomly died and his kingdom would have been split off into 4 other generals? Nobody. And then boom, the Romans. God controls the destiny of kingdoms. And he set it thin, and it played out over the course, so much of it played out over the course of Daniel's life. God, in one simple dream, laid out the master plan of empires. In Daniel chapter 5, verse 25 and 26, if we remember this part. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, Tekel, and Parsin, or Uparsin, as some of you guys have. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. That means God was counting down. No matter how big you got, no matter how weak, whatever, didn't matter. At the end of the time, it was over for you. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And Uparsin, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The prophecies of Daniel 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 all confirm this as well, and we can pick up a history book and watch it play out. It is so detailed that those who deny the authority of the Bible flat out say it could not have been written when you say it is, because it is too detailed. It is too accurate. Just smile at them. I know, isn't it awesome? It is true. It does happen. It did happen. And it happened right when he said it was. See, nations will rise and fall, power will grow and power will shrink. It has all been under the grand design and active control of our God. Number 2, we saw that he rules over the forces of nature. We saw that no matter how hot fire gets, God still has complete control over the elements. A few weeks ago, I set fire to some food in the microwave. You guys smell that? That was me. I'm blaming it on Linda. Because it was right after you came in, I put in the wrong number on the microwave. The church smelled like smoke. I smelled like smoke. The microwave still smells like smoke. Think about that, okay? Daniel chapter 3, verse 20. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. And these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. And a few verses later, in verse 27, everyone gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of these men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. So when I walked out of my room and realized that I had set fire to my little pizza rolls, there was, down that hallway, there was smoke like this much, okay? It wasn't just I burnt popcorn. I set it on fire, okay? I set the pizza rolls on fire. There's smoke all the way through. And I'm like, oh, great, I'm burning down the church. Awesome. Thanks, pastor. So I'm going down, and I turn in, and there's smoke everywhere in the kitchen. And I'm trying to get off my sweatshirt. I'm trying to see what's the damage that I have done. And just with my sweatshirt and me trying to get it there so I can get in, I'm like, yeah, it's true. You want to get low when you get into fire, okay? Because it's really bad. So I'm getting through, and I open the microwave, and I hit by all this smoke. And I found that I had cooked a bunch of charcoal. It was that bad. I have a picture of it if you want to see it at some point. It was bad. So I went back into my office. I'm trying to air it out. I'm thinking, oh my word, if Karen comes back, she's going to be so mad at me. And, I'm just thinking, man, Jim's going to come in. And he's just going to laugh at me. Oh, it's just so embarrassing. So I got it. Well, just in that few minutes, my sweatshirt stank so bad. I didn't even want to get in my car because as soon as my sweatshirt touched the car, my car seat smelled. How in the world did they come out of the iron furnace not smelling like smoke? God controls the forces of nature. The furnace, if it was an iron furnace, remember we talked, it could burn probably up to around 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Ish, okay? Pretty hot, 5 times hotter, all right, than what it usually was. Now, what is fascinating, what I found out is wool sets fire at 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Who knew? I didn't realize this, but you could light a sheep on fire. Just wait, okay? And I guess their wool, the way wool is, it actually self-extinguishes. So it's harder. And anybody agreeing with me, how do you know that sheep wool does this? You guys are... Anyway, so wool, and then sort of extinguishes. But still, wool would not have made it in an iron furnace. It would have burst into flames. They should have died. They should have smelled like smoke. It didn't happen. Not only did he control fire, he controlled animals. Daniel and the lion's den. Starving lions do not ignore fresh meat. Nope. Doesn't happen. A hungry lion is a fed lion because they will eat. That's what happens. God controlled it. Daniel chapter 6, my God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. Daniel chapter 4, if we're going to be technical, he controls fire, he controls animals, but he also controls microscopic little organisms. Because if, said that Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel chapter 4, started thinking he was a cow, and this could have happened as a result of syphilis or some other thing. He ended up with boanthropy as a result of an infection, of worms, of a disease of some kind. God also controlled that. And God, exactly, 7 years later? Oops, he's fine. That doesn't happen. God was in complete control over that. God is sovereignly in control over even the germs and viruses that affect us mentally. And I want to say one one thing, and you might have heard this point before, but that means that Jesus Christ, while he was actively being killed and hung on the cross, was actively exercising his sovereign control over the cross that held him, over the nails that were put into his hands and his feet, and were holding them together while they were being plunged into him. God is sovereignly in control over the forces of nature. Number 3, we saw that he bends the minds of the most powerful leaders. In Daniel chapter 3, this is really fascinating. We actually saw this. This is one of those things I haven't caught in Daniel before. But Daniel chapter 3, verse 28 and 29, we saw that Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship the God, or any God except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruin. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." God, through one event, bent and molded and shaped the mind of Nebuchadnezzar that actually promised protection for his people. In Daniel chapter 4, we saw God break one of the most powerful men ever, broke down the pride. Even Nebuchadnezzar said it in Daniel chapter 4, verse 37. "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble." AKA, I thought I was something, and then God made me go eat grass out in the field, and I realized I have nothing. Learn that one, God. I got it. Daniel chapter 6, God used another situation to get Darius to provide protection to all of God's people. In verse 25, Daniel 6, 25, "Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his kingdom shall be to the end." There is not a single person, king, dictator, leader, man, woman, or child that can oppose the will of God. Period. Well, wait a minute, Pastor. That's the answer you usually get, in your seminary class. Couldn't God just force everyone to get saved? Well, you're right. I guess the Bible's not true now. You've come up with the one question no one has ever asked in the history of humanity. Just quit my education there, change degrees, etc. One, God says that he doesn't tempt people or make people sin. He's pretty blunt about it. "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one." Oh, okay. But each person is tempted when he is lured away and enticed by his own desire, and then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So sin is my fault. Yep. Not God's? Nope. And then my second point is just because we do not understand something doesn't mean it isn't true. So back in the day, they really didn't have a way to explain gravity. You know that? I mean, well, if we can't explain it, then apparently it's not true. We're only just now starting to understand, we're just now even seeing black holes. We're just now realizing the universe is expanding. We're just now starting to we think we're hypothesizing, theorizing that there might actually be dark matter or this weird substance in space we don't really know. What does that mean? It didn't exist before we did. That's ridiculous. The amount of arrogance that says, well, I have to be able to perfectly understand God and how his sovereignty works. If it's true, there's a quote, a really cool quote. Oh yeah, remember this quote? All things are under God's rule and control, and that nothing happens without his direction or permission. God allows stuff to happen that he wouldn't agree with. We can see that. But it doesn't change the fact that he's in control. It never has. It never will. And it's really hard for us to understand that. R.C. Sproul says, this is a good quote, to say that God's sovereignty is limited by man's freedom is to make man sovereign. To say that mankind can somehow, in our free will, stop the sovereign control of God is saying that actually we have final say, not God. The fact is, it doesn't matter what I do, how I act, what I try to do, I cannot stop the will of God. I can't really explain how that works, though. Sorry. I can't. But God is sovereign, in control, working all things. It's good to hope to complete his perfect plan. And it somehow completely incorporates the fact that we choose and we blow it and we make mistakes all the time. Isn't that pretty awesome, though? God hasn't lost control. No matter how stupid we are, God hasn't lost control. Number 4. He sets the course of history. We could spend more time explaining how he controls history, dreams, angels, foods, diets, etc. He knows everything before it happens and every possible solution and outcome. Nothing catches him by surprise. We could spend a lot longer explaining everything, trying to, and then still realizing we still have more to explain. But what we are seeing so far can be identified by these two ideas. What we've seen, something called the transcendence of God and the immanence of God. Okay? It's really two things. Now, you guys might not use these in everyday vocabulary, but I mean, you can to impress people. It'd be cool. So the idea that God is transcendent is that God is and is set above the limits of our universe. See, our universe has boundaries. It has rules, ways in which it functions, light, gravity, time, all function within the universal system. Okay, it binds everything. We can't think outside the box, really. We tell people to think outside the box, and I know where they come from, but from one standpoint, we cannot imagine anything outside the realm of the limits that have been placed over us. We can't. We are finite individuals captured within rules and limits, and God sets above it. He is not bound by those. He's not bound by time. He's not bound by the rules of gravity or whatever. He's not. He sits above it. He created it. He can change it whenever he wants to. I haven't tested this, but is it true that when you flush the potty when you're on a ship and you go over the equator, it changes direction? I've heard it flushes a different way. I haven't tried it, because I haven't really been on a boat. But he could just decide to stop the planet Earth and spin it like Superman does the other way. Remember Superman, the first movie way back in the day? You guys' generation in the 70s? I know you guys watched it. Don't even try to act like you didn't. But how Superman flew backwards and changed the direction, God could just do that whenever he wanted to. Whenever he wants to, he could do it. And he could make it realize where we all thought that was normal the whole time. He can just do whatever he wants. It's just insane. But God is also, and this is what's neat. So the immanence of God is that God oftentimes places himself within the confines of the universe. He places himself inside. He functions within time. As a human, he obeyed the natural laws. I do not see a verse where it says, and Jesus floated around in the sky because he wanted to. He did the water, though, didn't he? He just sort of I'm just going to walk on water now. you can do that? Oh, yeah. He could have flown. He could have walked on water. He started walking through things, at the end of his life. I mean, disappearing and appearing. He just started making up his rules again. And that's what's so awesome is, what we see. So this last point. We're going to get into there. So this last point is good. So he will get the best for his people. Is the last point. Even in the midst of that, he is transcendent and he is immanent as we're going with this discussion in. It says this last, okay, so look at Daniel chapter 7. I just think this is so cool. So Daniel 7, verse 27 says, the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. The transcendent God is making himself immanent and getting himself and putting himself on the earth in an everlasting kingdom where all dominions shall serve and obey him. You know what's a very common phrase is we look forward to going to heaven, right? Right. One problem though, we're not gonna spend that much time in heaven. We're gonna be spending a whole lot of time here on earth, where God is going to be ruling here on an everlasting, real kingdom, and all will serve and obey him. You guys are like, what? Just read. The New Jerusalem ends up on earth. Read Revelation. So yeah, we're gonna go to heaven. What we're actually trying to communicate is we're going to be in the presence of Jesus Christ. And if he wants to go to Mars, Mars is gonna be the coolest place ever. We're just gonna go with him. We're going to be in the presence of our Savior. That's what we're trying to say by heaven, and I get it. But chapter 12, verse 2, it says, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall wake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So some will be woken up and be given life. And as we read in chapter 7, 27, the whole, the greatness of the kingdoms under heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. That's what I want to emphasize there. The kingdoms of earth under heaven will be given to mankind. Those who served God, those who exercised their faith and trust and follow the Lord, they were going to be given to us. That's pretty neat. The sovereign God, who's transcendent over everything, puts himself here and steps into earth and its rules and its limits, and he steps into it. He's imminently a part of it. And he's going to give us the kingdom. And chapter 12, verse 13, but go your way to the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days. And what he tells Daniel at the end is, hey, keep doing your thing like you've been doing. You're going to rest, you will die, but one day you will get to stand in your allotted place at the end of days. See, we see God's transcendence because we see his immanence. The reason we see and can even just a tiny, barely minute understanding of how incredible God is because he has decided to be immanent, be with us, walk with us, talk with us. It's the only reason we see, because if God never was immanent, we'd have no explanation for things. We'd come up with all sorts of crazy theories. Some crazy theories that we're currently being taught now. But the fact is, God is here with us. He wants to communicate with us. He talks to us, and we see this. He controls the destiny of kingdoms to preserve and to teach his people. He rules over the forces of nature to preserve and protect his children. He bends the minds of kings to provide protection and deliver his people. He is guiding all history to one point where he reigns forever. God breaks the natural laws. He sovereignly rules over nature, kings, and kingdoms because he wants what is best for you. Christmas is a time where we are celebrating God breaking the natural law of man and becoming a little human person. That's what we're celebrating. God decided to become a man to live with us, to smell like us, to have the problems that we do, and to die for us. See, God is sovereign. And this isn't just a theological term. This is the basis of our understanding of God. I mean, this is something that we really got to think about and realize we're not going to fully get it. He is sovereign over every breath we take and to that star that explodes, and he loves you. There's a quote that I thought was cool. This is just a good reminder. If it were possible for me to alter any part of God's plan, I would only spoil it. And it's just a reminder. I can't play God. I shouldn't play God. I can play God. I shouldn't try to, because I usually end up just messing things up. But if it were possible for me to alter any part of his plan, I could only spoil it. And God and his plans are not interrupted or thwarted because we blow it, or because we mess up, or because someone did something stupid. We can trust that God is going to do his work despite mankind getting in the way. Because there are quite a few times in our life that we'll have blown it and we'll have messed up. We can look back in life and like, I really messed up there. Shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have done it that way. There's no hope. Yeah, there is. God's still in control. But oftentimes, I find that Christians deal with the result of other people blowing it. They're the ones who messed you over. They're the ones who did something to hurt you or damage it. So many times, Christians are the ones who pay for other people's mistakes. And what's neat is the fact that, God is still sovereignly and actively in control over your situation. And he works around the problems of other people and what they do to you, and we can trust him. And we see that in Daniel. How many times did Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego deal with other people's mistakes, and they got through it just fine? And then he guides and he shapes the history and the course of nations. No matter how bad or how wicked things get, God is still and has been and will always be in control. So out of all the accounts and prophecies in Daniel, remember that God is sovereign